Episode 88 of the Interpretation
87, you
Station
muppet.
is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode. It's going to be a tutorial. We haven't had a tutorial in a while now, have we? It's going to be a tutorial for my Russian-speaking followers and viewers. Oh yes, it's been a while since we've done one of these. I've been slacking a bit. But anyway, we've got an interesting episode for you today, an interesting tutorial on the subject of Libya. Now, just before we start, I want to just point out that if you notice me making this movement during the episode, it's not deliberate. As you might know, I had some back problems. If you watch my episodes regularly enough, I had some back problems a few weeks ago. I had to go to a physiotherapist and everything, and one of the things he advised me to do was to use a Pilates ball. So, following medical advice, I have taken my wife's Pilates ball and I now use it at the dining table, when watching TV, and of course when I make Interpretation Station episodes. So yes, there's nothing suspicious going on when I'm doing this. It's probably because I'm just thinking and just having a wee bounce. Anyway, so yes, Libya is the subject of our episode today. We have a statement that's been provided to us by Sam. Sam, thank you very much. What we're going to do is we're going to set out the episode like this. We're going to, before we actually get to the statement that Sam's provided us, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on the situation in Libya. Situation in Libya is maybe sort of temporary. The situation in Libya has maybe perhaps receded slightly from the headlines in recent times. Well, especially with what's going on in Afghanistan, for example, now. And also there's been something of a truce there now holding since October of last year. So it's not quite as topical as it once was, as it certainly would have been this time last year. Nonetheless, you get the impression it's one of those situations that at the drop of a hat could easily flare up again, and it's a big issue for a lot of the big geopolitical powers, and Russia is certainly amongst those. So what we're going to do is, before we actually, as I say, get to the text, I'm going to give you just a sort of bit of background on the conflict, but the way I'm going to do it is I'm not going to give you a whole history of Libya. You should really look that up yourselves. Do a bit of reading. Certainly, if you're going to be in a meeting on Libya, you should look up that history yourselves. But I'm just going to give you the background from, as an interpreter. Let's say I've just been assigned to a meeting on Libya. I've got a couple of hours to prepare for it. Where do I start? And for one thing that I find useful, for example, in a scenario like that, is to go to the most recent resolution on the situation in hand. Now, in the case of Libya, it's actually two resolutions, because there were two resolutions adopted in the space of 2 days back in April, and those resolutions, when you do that, you see, what you want to do is you want to look up the important vocabulary. You obviously want to find out who the players are, both in terms of the belligerents and also in terms of who the peacemakers are, shall we say, and the various mechanisms that are in play. So usually a look through the most recent relevant resolution is one way of pinpointing those main actors and main themes. Now, I'm just going to take you through those two resolutions, and then also another very useful thing to know in a situation of conflict, maybe post-conflict currently, is the sort of situation on the ground. So I'll be using a statement. Okay, so the place we're going to start then is Resolution 2570, and I'm going to share the screen with you for that one. Now, I will provide you links to both the resolutions and any useful material that I quote during this episode. I'll obviously put that all in the description box underneath the video. That's where you can find it. So here I have Resolution 2570 that was adopted on the 16th of April, and it's recalling Resolution 1970, all subsequent resolutions on Libya. By the way, before I start, I'd say that Resolution 1970 is the starting point for everything, the whole peace process, the whole international community response to the situation in Libya. So Resolution 1970 was adopted back in 2011, as you can see. Right in the midst, right in when the civil war was going off, when it kicked off initially with the uprising against Colonel Gaddafi. So that Resolution 1970 was adopted. I think that was when things were in a real state of crisis, in emergency, battles going off everywhere. And so all these subsequent resolutions refer back to that one. So it's that's another one. Again, if you're going to be doing a meeting on Libya, it's good to also take a look at that Resolution 1970. But as I say, for now, we're going to just look at the two most relevant resolutions. And as I say, this was adopted back in April. So let's just take you through it. So I've highlighted in yellow some of the most important vocab and some of the most important actors, dates, etc. So this is wording that the UN generally likes to use in crisis situations, wherever they may. So the UN facilitated Libyan-led, Libyan-owned political process. So it's similar to the wording that they use for the situation in Syria also. So again, the emphasis is that very much on the fact that this process should be owned and led by the Libyans themselves without foreign interference. Now, elections have been penciled in for the 24th of December of this year, so that's an important date to know when doing Libya. So that's going to be a real turning point, we hope for the better, elections at the end of this year. Now we have the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. Now, the Lpdf is the acronym for that. Wikipedia describes the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum as an intra-Libyan series of meetings started in late 2020, aiming to quickly lead to Libyan elections and to democratic legitimacy of Libyan institutions. The Lpdf continues other elements of the Libyan peace process taking place in the context of the Second Libyan Civil War. So the forum was coined as such by the then UNSMIL chief, so the UNSMIL being the UN mission to Libya, Stephanie Williams. And the aim of the Lpdf was defined as being to generate consensus on a unified governance framework and arrangements that will lead to the holding of national elections in the shortest possible time frame in order to restore Libya's sovereignty and the democratic legitimacy of Libyan institutions. And an important element to this is that participants had to declare themselves ineligible from positions of political or sovereign power in the new institutions. So I guess with the idea of minimizing as far as possible any conflicts of interest. So the meetings of the Lpdf, they began in November 2020 in Tunisia. And this is an important decision that was taken on the 18th of January 2021. 72 of the Lpdf members participated in a vote for a unified executive authority selection procedure. The proposal passed. More than 63% a decision was reached. 51 voters in favor, 19 against, 2 abstentions, 2 absences. And the outcome of that procedure resulted in selection of Mohammed al-Menfi as the president of the Presidential Council, Abdul Hamid al-Dabaib as prime minister, and Musa al-Koni and Abdallah al-Lafi as Presidential Council members. So that is an important. That's an important mechanism. Now we have the High National Elections Commission. It's always useful to know in various countries what the sort of main electoral body is called that monitors the elections. So in Libya, they call it the High National Elections Commission. So this was the ceasefire that was then reached on the 23rd of October 2020, the ceasefire agreement between, well, we'll come to who the main belligerents are, recalling the commitment of the participants of the Berlin Conference. So this is again an important. This was an important conference. In fact, so there was Berlin Conference 1, which was held in 2020, and there was a second one held in early this year. Now, the Berlin Conference was really spawned on was the initiative is based on the Salamé 3-point peace plan. Okay, so you had Hassan Salamé, who was head of UNSMIL, so that's the UN support mission in Libya. So he proposed a 3-point peace plan to the UN Security Council. And the three areas it covered were one, which was a truce between the Government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army. Now, they're the two main parties in this conflict. And that's who the truce is holding between. The second part of the plan was an international meeting of countries involved in the conflict to stop the fighting, implement the UN Security Council arms embargo, which is under Resolution 1973, so that's an important resolution to know in relation to the arms embargo, and promote the following of international human rights law. Now, when they talk about the international meeting of countries implicated in the conflict, they're generally referring to, so on the side of the Government of National Accord, their biggest backer, you would probably say, is Turkey. Turkey and Qatar are the sort of main champions of that side. On the other side, you've got the Libyan National Army, whose chief sponsors are probably most directly the United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, but also Russia tends to be on the side of the Libyan National Army. So again, it's a big I mean, the whole Libyan conflict. It's your classic proxy conflict where you've got the bigger powers subletting the conflicts to their own sort of satellites. I mean, if you look at it one way, you could see the Russians are subletting it to the UAE, who are subletting it to the Libyan National Army. The Libyan National Army being led by General Haftar, so that's an important name to be familiar with. And on the other side, as I say, you've got the Turkey. The international community has certainly been more on the side of the Government of National Accord, and as I say, its main backers have been Turkey and Qatar. And the third part of Salame's peace plan is to hold a Libyan meeting, similar to the Libyan National, which we call the Libyan National Conference, and it would involve 3 tracks: economic, military, and political. So those are the 3 tracks to bear in mind when talking about the inter-Libyan sort of segment of the peace process. Intra-Libyan. Now, some useful vocabulary here. This is the illicit transfer, destabilizing accumulation, misuse of weapons, and the flow of armed groups and mercenaries. This particularly relates to an episode you may recall, you may not recall, during the war, when a whole arms arsenal just disappeared. It was big news at the time. The Russians, it was the arsenals that belonged to basically the Gaddafi government. Rocket launchers, man pads, all kinds of weapons. They went missing pretty much in the middle of the desert, from what I understand, or from what I recall. And so there's a lot of these weapons circulating all around the region that are obviously being used to fuel various other conflicts, both in Libya and in neighboring countries. So here's a reference then to the UN mission, the support mission in Libya, UNSMIL, Coordinating and supporting the provision of humanitarian assistance for refugees and migrants. So that's one of their key roles of the UN mission, is the sort of humanitarian part of it. We scroll down again. Okay, so now we're coming across some of the main institutions or the main actors of the Interim Presidency Council and the Government of National Unity. So the Government of National Unity was established on the 10th of March 2021, and the key figure to note there is this gentleman Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh, who is the Prime Minister. So he was selected at the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, the Lpdf, as we talked about, on the 5th of February 2021. Scrolling down here to paragraph 9, OP9. By the way, just since we're on the topic, okay, UN resolution. This is always very important vocabulary to be comfortable with, especially if you're in a meeting discussing a resolution. So the UN resolution, you have the preambular part of the resolution, this bit which is all reaffirming, welcoming, recognizing, reiterating. This is all the preamble. And so often if they talk about preambular paragraph 1 or 2, it refers to these. Sometimes they'll also call it PP1, PP2, PP3. So if you hear that, they're talking about the preamble. Then we come to the operative part of a resolution. Now these are numbered, okay, and these are all. So you'll see here how this was all participles, as I say, recognizing, recalling, etc. Now this is the operative part, is what's being done, okay. Welcomes, calls on, recalls, underlines. Okay, so these will be referred to as OP1, OP2. Okay, so it's very important to know that if you're going to be working on something, on issues relating to a UN resolution and the actual nuts and bolts of that resolution. Okay, so this is again it's an important vocabulary to be familiar with. Assets frozen pursuant to paragraph 17 of Resolution 1970. So as I say, that Resolution 1970 is the sort of core resolution. That's like as I say, the starting point. And one of the things at that point that was called on was that you had a freeze on the assets of many of Gaddafi's allies and associates. Leading figures in his government. So they introduced an assets freeze, which is still very much in place in a lot of cases. This is that money's just being held. The idea is to at some point give it back to the Libyan people. More useful vocabulary here, paragraph 10. Disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of armed groups. This is classic sort of UN peacekeeping stuff. So that process is called DDR. And of relevant non-state armed actors, being ISIS or Islamic State, whatever you want to call them, who, they as we'll see in the map of the current situation on the ground, they are a factor there. They have a significant amount of support in certain parts of Libya. Then security sector reform. That's another just important notion. Often, as I say, goes hand in hand with DDR. Remember DDR together with SSR, security sector reform. Then down here, in OP13, so the arms embargo imposed under Resolution 1970. So there was a ban on sales by foreign countries of weapons to Libya. And so arms embargoes in paragraph 14, often what goes hand in hand with arms embargoes are the travel ban and the assets freeze. And so this was all to do there with this sanctions list that was drawn up for individuals. Here we go, of individuals or entities who breach the arms embargo. So the designation of individuals or entities who breach the arms embargo. Very good, again, the vocabulary to be comfortable with when they talk about the designation of individuals or entities. Now here's an important body. The 5+5 Joint Military Commission. So this is very important, like at an internal level. So the 5+5 Libyan Joint Military Commission is so basically 5 senior officers appointed by the Government of National Accord and 5 senior officers appointed by the Libyan National Army. By the way, just so sometimes you'll see the GNA, the Government of National Accord, and then you'll see the Government of National Unity. Well, the Government of National Accord is what was the side prior to the ceasefire. Those were the two sides. Now that there's been a ceasefire, it's because the government has more or less been agreed on between the two warring parties. It's now called the Government of National Unity. So just in case to clarify any confusion there. So they are participating in talks moderated by Salame. So it's the senior military officials on either side. And again, this is just another mechanism that will get referred to quite a bit. This Libyan-led, Libyan-owned ceasefire monitoring mechanism to help ensure that the 23rd of October ceasefire stays in place. And then down here in OP19, deployment of UNSMIL ceasefire monitors. So that's again part of the whole peace process, the deployment by the UN mission of these monitors. And then I've just highlighted this final paragraph, OP22, because this is an expression they use a lot in the Security Council. Decides to remain actively seized of the matter. They're always seized of the matter. Whenever a delegate says that, in a foreign language, it's always good just to know the sort of. It's always good to know just the best way of expressing that. Sometimes I say to be apprised of the matter, but actively seized of the matter is very much how they like. Is a term they like to use a lot at the UN. So that's 2570. So now we'll move to the resolution that was adopted the following day. This was on the 16th of April 2021, Resolution 2571. And so it's going to repeat some of the things that we saw in the first one. So again, we're starting in the preamble, PP1. So again, mention arms embargo, travel ban, assets freeze, measures concerning illicit oil export. So that is a big deal. Okay, lots of illicit oil exports. Libya has got a lot of the black stuff, and it's held in different hands. It's not under unified ownership by any means. So there's a lot of oil that gets onto the market, not entirely legally. So that's a big. That is going to be this resolution goes into more details on that. Okay, coming down here. So report violations to the UN Sanctions Committee, and recalling in that regard that individuals or entities engaging in or providing support for acts that threaten the peace, stability, or security of Libya may be designated for targeted sanctions. So this, I think, refers to the 1973 Resolution 1973, the sanctions. There's a sanctions committee called the 1973 Sanctions Committee. 1973 is the reference to the UN resolution. And again, here, you talk about designation of individuals. You also hear terms like listing and delisting of people on those sanctions lists. So those are, again, two important concepts to be familiar with. And I will give you the Russian equivalents for that up on the screen. I'm not going to say them right now because I can't think of them off the top of my head. But when I come to producing it, I'll stick the relevant vocab there on the screen for you. Okay, so moving on. Illicit export of petroleum, including crude oil and refined petroleum products. So again, this is a reference to that. Illegal trade in oil, whatever, and petroleum byproducts. If they talk about refined petroleum products, it's a bit of a mouthful, so a good word. Sort of to bail you out, maybe byproducts, petroleum byproducts. The unification of Libya's institutions, that's again a big issue, a big sort of challenge that they're trying to meet. Okay, now, still in the preamble of this resolution, the inspection on the high seas off the coast of Libya of vessels bound to or from Libya believed to be carrying arms or related material in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions, and the seizure and disposal of such items, provided that members states make good faith efforts to first obtain the consent of the vessel's flag state prior to any inspections while acting in accordance with those resolutions. So there's lots of really dense vocabulary, in this inspection off the high seas. vessels being bound to or from, seizure and disposal of items, obtaining the consent of the vessel's flag state. So the flag state, by the way, is where a vessel or ship is registered, as opposed to its port state. So the difference between a flag state and a port state. So the flag state is the flag of the country that the vessel is carrying and where the vessel is registered. The port state is merely any state with an international port where a vessel happens to be moored. Okay, where it happens to be located. This is real vocabulary to do with law of the sea. Okay, UNCLOS. I'm bouncing, aren't I? UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, as you'll see in this resolution, makes several references to it. Then down here, okay, in OP3, the mechanism used to certify legal exports of petroleum, including crude oil and refined petroleum products. By the way, and again, I'll also include like the the links to the Russian version as well, so you can cross-reference all the vocabulary. To expeditiously contact the concerned vessel's flag state. Again, just useful vocabulary to know, useful expressions. Persons designated by the committee. Down here in OP11, engaging in or providing support for other acts that threaten the peace, stability, or security of Libya, or obstruct or undermine the successful completion of its political transition. These are the kind of excerpts from UN resolutions that states love to quote, okay, when making statements. Incidents of non-compliance, sharing information, facilitating transit and granting access to weapons storage facilities. Again, something that states are going to be a part, again, that's a crucial part of the resolution. Basically, ensuring that the whole thing is transparent, that any oil or any petroleum products coming in and out, that it's all transparent, that it's all certified, etc. And finally, to provide unhindered and immediate access. That's again a good collocation. They use it often for humanitarian aid, provide unhindered immediate access for humanitarian aid. In this case, it is in particular to persons, documents, and sites the panel deems relevant to the execution of its mandate. Okay, so lots of useful material. If you've got a meeting on Libya, maybe you can even just print a resolution like this off and highlight these important words. That might just help you get through a tough meeting, a tough statement on it. Okay, so then just before we get cracking with Sam's masterpiece, and it is something of a masterpiece, I tell you. He's got some real lovely words he uses. You're going to learn some really nice vocabulary. Let's just take a look at the situation, at the academic part of the show. So just to give you a bit of background on the speaker. So this was the Russian permanent representative, Perm Rep, Vladimir Niebienzy, speaking at a meeting of the Security Council on the situation in Libya, as I say, back in 2017. The next voice you will hear will be Mr. Sam Dyson's.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're pleased to see you in the chair of the President of the Security Council.
One little tip to give you here. Now, you see there's a bit of hesitation here. There was a little slight technical problem. And as soon as he said, we're Miradi Vidit, I know he's going to say, we're pleased to see you in the seat of the President of the Security Council, right? It's a formality they use all the time. So when he starts saying it and then he stops again, I mean, just in your own, just as a tip, just get it straight in your mind. It's almost 99% certain what he's going to say. So just get it set out in your mind, and it gives you a sort of little head start. Okay, you almost get a free sentence to get to sort of launch yourself in with. So don't just sit there idle. Take advantage of that moment. He's given you those 3 words, so you know where it's going to go. So it's all these little small psychological things that can help you. On we go.
We're grateful to Mr. Salame for his briefing. We really hope that you will be able to cope with the difficult task you've been entrusted with, that is helping to unify Libya.
Okay, so Sam's gone with for Rashitivayam, he's gone with we hope. I'd like to go with we trust. Either's fine. Trust is a bit of a register higher. It's up to you, really. Vy spravíte, so that you cope. It's a good solution. Now, this is a classic sort of, again, Russian construction. So возложенные на вас сложные задачи. So these compound adjectives that are sort of separated in the middle. And Sam did probably what I would do. You know, it's going to be like a задача or mandat of возложенные на вас. So he waits and says the complex tasks entrusted to you, or vested in you, or mandated to you. Don't forget to use mandate as a verb is a very good way of solution for that kind of thing. And if you're really stuck, you could, I guess, just say, we trust that you'll be able to cope with your mandate, your complex mandate. You could probably get away with saying that in helping to unify Libya.
We sincerely wish you every success. That is the only way forward, if the goal is to swiftly end the crisis and tackle all threats emanating from Libya, including terrorism.
Okay, another more favorite Russian expressions here. Нет альтернативы. Такому пути нет альтернативы. So Sam's gone, this is the only way forward. That's an interesting way of doing it. I would probably I think when I did it, I just said there's no alternative. Is the only option. You've got a few things to go with. Often that expression will come at the end of a sentence. For example, they say something like, they'll often say, решение мирным путем нет альтернативы. Where it sounds maybe nicer when they leave it at the end than to say is the only option. A peaceful solution has no alternative. Peaceful solution is the only option. To me, in English, it sounds nicer to say is the only option. But when the нет альтернативы comes at the start of a sentence, as it does in this case, I think it's just, I'm fine with just saying there's no alternative. I think you can say there's no alternative in either scenario. I'm just giving you a few different options to mull over. And then again, you have another one of these compound adjectives. Ликвидацию исходящих из Ливии угроз. Again, typical Russian, typical thing that they say, the Russians in the Security Council, wherever it may be. So he's gone with to tackle the threats emanating from Libya. I like eliminating things. To be honest, when I hear the Russians talking about ликвидация, I like to be quite... I don't like to beat around the bush. I think, eliminate, eradicate. So you can see the threats emanating from Libya, the threat stemming from Libya. Again, just be aware that it's an expression they use all the time, and you want a couple of words that you're very comfortable with to convey that idea.
The complex situation in the country is still a major cause of concern.
Okay, it's still a cause of concern. Often when I hear по-прежнему like that, I'll say continues to be a source of concern. I didn't say a source of concern. Sam's gone with a cause for concern. Both are fine.
There is still political division. The public authorities are acting at cross purposes.
When I hear сохраняется at the start of a sentence, my reaction tends to be just to say, still, there's still. That's what Sam's gone for, there's still. Раздробленность, he's gone with division there. Fragmentation is perhaps a slight little bit better. It really gets across that idea of the whole the way that there's all these various different little tribes and factions competing. But again, division or fragmentation, both are good. Now here, this is Sam does very well here. This last word in that sentence, vraznoboy. I had difficulties there. So what he gave was cross purposes. They're still acting at cross purposes. I mean, another thing you could perhaps say, it's a very English expression, I think. The authorities are still at, at sixes and sevens. Now, maybe you ask, though, okay, Roland, look, I hear vraznobo, and I don't know what to do with it. What should I do? So the interpretation station advice, and I think caught me out, is you've got to display safe and try and what the context. At this point, you need to be at least fairly familiar with what the context of the situation in Libya is. You know that the central government is extremely weak. Okay, disarray. There's another word, by the way. Is in disarray. You could say that the authorities are in disarray. That's another one that's just come to me. But anyways, you know the situation is that they're very weak. Okay, and if all else fails, maybe that's the word that you should just resort to. It's very neutral, pretty much is accurate. It does. I mean, no, it's not what Nyebenzi is. He's trying to get across a more important, something more substantial than that. They're really one lot of going this way, another lot of going that way. But if that doesn't come to you in the moment, then you just have to. You have to say something. You have to say something, right? So if you say something that just they're weak, you might get away with it. Hopefully, the Russian minion sitting behind Nyebenzi. Maybe he's in a good mood that morning. Maybe he's got a new girlfriend or something. Maybe it's Saturday payday. He maybe lets you off that first time if he's listening in. But you have to try and say something that fits into the context more or less. So that's perhaps what I would say. The authorities are still weak, vulnerable, whatever.
Across vast areas, armed groups are running amok, including radicals.
Yeah, across vast areas throughout the country, there's a few little different solutions you could use here. And I like for Haziainicha, he says to run amok. What else could we say in English? A running riot, rampaging. If you're feeling really nervous and you're really trying to, and which you would be, believe me, I know what it's like interpreting like the Russian permanent representative, and you're really hanging on to every word. You could turn it into saying something across the country. We see rampaging armed groups, for example. You turn that Haziainicha into an adjective. So that's another way of getting around that. And I like how he's just dropped направленность, okay, including radicals.
In tucked away corners, terrorists are hiding, which those terrorists have sustained certain losses, but they still represent a threat.
So he's gone, потаенных углах, he said tucked away corners. That's very nice. Maybe you could say in remote corners as well. Terrorists are hiding. And that's a good collocation to have. They've sustained losses. Suffered losses, but sustained losses. That's really nice. Но они все еще опасны. They still pose a threat. They still pose a danger.
Different forms of criminal activity are prospering. They're being conducted in criminal networks which are ensnaring the Mediterranean region.
He's using a whole string of these constructions where the verb comes first, if you noticed, right? Хозяйничают вооруженные группировки, прячутся террористы, процветают различные формы. It's a bit like Arabic. Are there any Arabic speakers out there? You do like your verbs at the start of sentences. So anyway, one way, if it's making you nervous, holding on to the verb to wait for the noun. So in this case, the noun is various forms of criminal activities. You have this sort of device where you can throw in, we see the prospering of various forms of criminal activity. There is prospering. It's not great English, don't get me wrong, but that's one way if you're feeling really nervous and you wanted to stay with the speaker. That way you can just get that verb out of the way and not have to remember it till the end of the clause. And also for, okay, процветать, prospering, thriving is a really good word as well. Criminal activity is thriving. And I like what he said here, опутывает регион Средиземноморья, to ensnare the Mediterranean region. Again, if nothing better comes in that moment, if nothing more vivid, graphic, to do justice to the original Russian comes to mind, then you have to say something just like covering the Mediterranean region. Again, it's better than nothing.
There are reports that some branches of that smuggling activity might reach as far as Europe.
Quite interested in what he did with свидетельство того. These are reports that the smuggling activity might reach to as far as Europe. I think that definitely works in this context. With me, when I hear свидетельство, the word that always comes to me is testimony, which in this sense, it's all right. It would work. There are testimonies. I always think of witness testimonies. I actually think that maybe the best solution is evidence. There's evidence that contraband activity might reach as far as Europe. And I say evidence because I think evidence is quite a versatile word, because you can use it in this context, as in evidence and reports being synonyms in this case, but also, for example, in a more legal context, when they talk about свидетельство, evidence, there you can't really use reports, okay? Evidence is much, in a legal context, evidence is much stronger than just reports. Reports are, in that respect, sort of hearsay. So that's why evidence might be a good one to go with, because it's the most versatile and it can fit into both contexts. But certainly in this instance, also reports I think does work well. But just be careful. Don't think you can use reports in every context.
Clearly, the Libyan economy is not improving.
Не здоровится. It's an unusual verb. I must admit, if I've come across that, I mean, it's obviously what it means, right? So he says not improving. You could say is in a bad way.
What is also in a dire situation is the social sector.
And again, you have a synonym. Okay, so не здоровится, в тяжелом положении, pretty much mean the same thing. So with that sort of, with в тяжелом положении, in a dire situation. Woeful is another good adjective to use along those lines. So here, yeah, it's good to have a few synonyms: dire, woeful, appalling, that you can sort of toss in, so that you're not always repeating the same expression.
This sustained, permanent chaos is negatively impacting Libyans who've grown tired of the protracted consequences of the military misadventure in 2011.
Very interesting words, and some very interesting words here in this sentence. Отрицательно сказывается. Now, I had a moment of inspiration a few days ago. I mean, what he said was fine. I think, it's negatively affected, negatively impacting. That's absolutely fine. What about this? Taking its toll on. I was really happy when that came to mind. Taking its toll on Libyans, on the plight of положение ливийцев. You could say taking its toll on Libyans, taking its toll on the plight of the Libyans. Okay, there's a couple of ways you could do that. Уставших от затянувшихся последствий. So yeah, protracted. It is definitely the best word. Whenever you hear it talk about конфликты being затянувшиеся, okay, protracted conflict. So that's definitely my go-to word there. And then военной авантюры in 2011. So he's actually added the misadventure. So the Russians, they're often very critical of usually the military misadventures or adventures of the US. Another word that I had here, another idea could be escapades. That I sometimes use when I hear that. But I think certainly they talk about adventurism, military adventurism, as a policy, shall we say. In this context, when they're talking about specific aventuri, I think any one of those three things could work. Of military misadventures, adventures. Yeah, there is a definite negative context to even military adventure. There is a negative context to it already. And then, as I say, escapades could be another alternative. Okay, so here I am. I'm back from work. I was at work. I've come back now, sitting on a Pilates ball, bouncing up and down. Okay, let's get back to Sam's work. By the way, while I was away, just for that sentence we had a moment ago, в тяжелом положении пребывает социальный сектор, I had a moment of inspiration when I was at work. I do believe I was possibly in the toilet when it happened. As I say, this inspiration tends to come to me in the gents. Тяжелом положении, I think dismal position, dismal plight. Haven't used that word in a long time. And since we're on dismal, abysmal. They rhyme. Think about that for those sorts of situations. They're in a dismal state. Okay. So carrying on where we left off. To же время.
At the same time, some promising signs have appeared, which allow us to harbour some hopes that some progress will be made in the political settlement.
Okay, I like that. Обнадеживающие моменты. Promising signs. That's very nice. Encouraging signs. There's another alternative. Позволяющие рассчитывать. So to allow, to harbour hopes, or that would maybe rekindle hopes. That's what that essentially means. I mean, if you were to translate it word for word, enabling us to hope for, enabling us to look forward to. That's how they say it in Russian, right? But I think in nice English, we would say something along the lines of rekindling hopes of progress in the political settlement, for урегулирование, or political resolution.
Sensible Libyan figures appear to understand that the crisis can only be resolved through political means.
Again, I really like what he's gone with. As I said at the start, a bit of a masterpiece, this one from Sam. Здравомыслящие, ливийские деятели. Okay, so he said sensible for здравомыслящие. That's a really nice word. One thing came to my mind was right-minded. People in their right mind, and I think we do say, in English, right-minded political figures for деятель. That's a really good word, by the way, for that. Better than other, statesmen or activists, definitely not. So that for деятель, that's a word that comes up a lot, and it can sort of cause people problems. And I think that's a really good solution for it. Just a figure. In this case, okay, Libyan figures. Often talk about политические деятели, so political figures. That's a really nice solution.
Of fundamental importance is the obligation to refrain from applying force, and also to show readiness to work on the basis of the Libyan political agreement as regards the implementation of earlier arrangements for the formation of nationwide public authorities and security structures.
Again, some nice stuff here. So look, what he does right at the start, принципиальное значение имеет. So he just sticks in the of right at the start, which we can do in English, of I can't remember exactly what he said, vital importance, whatever. So that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing that, putting that of at the start. Воздерживаться от применения силы. So he said to refrain from the use of force. I like to talk about, I've said this many times before, but again, it's worth repeating. I like to eschew the use of force, the commitment to eschew the use of force. Again, you've got to abstain from the use of force, to desist from. Remember all these words: refrain, eschew, desist, abstain from. This sort of semantic field. And also, it's interesting when he talks about the реализация ранее достигнутых договоренностей. The less experienced among you might be tempted to think that you have to render достигнутых, as in достигнутых договоренностей. But, really, in English, we would just say in implementing the earlier arrangement. So договоренность, always go with arrangement as opposed to agreement. An arrangement's a bit looser. Договоренность is a bit of more of a looser concept, I think, than договор. So earlier arrangements. I don't think you need to say here earlier reached arrangements, just the earlier arrangements. Формирование общенациональных органов власти, and then so on establishing nationwide. So nationwide is always a very good, as Sam said, is always a very good solution for общенациональные.
We wish to note, in particular, the resolve here of the Libyan people to conduct elections under UN observation in accordance with Mr. Salami's plan of action.
It's always a bit nasty, I find, when they start off with the double negative in Russian. Нельзя не отметить. So my immediate reaction is always just give two negatives basically mean an affirmative, right? Don't go down the road at this point. It would be remiss of me not to mention. That's just far too many words to express that. And you know what this guy Nabienzi's like when he speaks. He tends to speak very, very clipped, and it's very fast, and you don't want to be using more words than you have to. So instead of just saying it would be remiss not to do something, you want to say, yeah, we should, which I think is what Sam says. We should note the nacionalist, the resolve or the determination of the Libyans.
Hopefully, in Tripoli and Tobruk, everyone understands that overcoming the crisis is something that is possible only through pooling efforts around the negotiation table.
Хочется надеяться, so that's good. Again, just hopefully. We hope. Hopefully is nice. Поняли. Поняли, что преодолеть кризис. Understand. Okay, that's the most obvious way of doing it. Also, понимать, понять is often in English we would say realize. Hopefully they realize that overcoming or surmounting the crisis is only possible. So he said pooling efforts around the negotiating table. Again, there's a couple of different ways you could really say this. You could say through joint efforts at the negotiating table. Often совместными усилиями. I often talk about just pulling together. Not so Sam said pooling our efforts, pool. I often pull together when they talk about совместными усилиями. So I might say is only possible by pulling together at the negotiating table. So you got to, as I say, there's a few different ways of getting around that one.
Otherwise, the country will be further seeped in chaos, which is likely to have irreversible consequences for Libyan statehood.
Okay, and a couple of interesting choices of word here. Погрузиться в еще больший хаос. So he said it will be seeped in further chaos. I was thinking we'll be plunged in further. Погрузиться, for me at any rate, the image I always have as being plunged. But again, I use seeped or steeped in further chaos. You talk about maybe being steeped in blood. So yeah, okay, but I think what you said is fine. I like, as I say, for pogruzitsa, that image, as I say, tend to go with plunged. Now this word chryevati, they love this word, the Russians. Certainly at the UN anyway. And I tend to play very safe with it. I just tend to say fraught. I think that's the word they're almost, our friends, the chryevati, fraught. And then you could say here, fraught with the irreversible consequences for Libyan statehood. I mean, what Sam, he's sort of paraphrased it slightly. He says, likely to have irreversible consequences. Just uses up a few more words than it's just fraught with. So that's just a personal choice. Anyway, I like my fraught with.
We support the efforts undertaken under UN auspices and welcome the emerging trend towards finding ways out.
So it's similar to how I said a couple of minutes ago with the stignutic dogovorенности, the sort of the stignutic is almost redundant, really, when going into the English. Kind of similar situation with the предпринимаемые. You don't really need to render it. You could say we support the you. You could this whole thing. Подигидай он усилия. We support the efforts under UN aegises. I was thinking we support the UN's efforts, although it's not quite the UN's efforts. It's all the efforts that are being sort of invested in the context of the process at the UN. So the safest, best, probably the snappiest way of doing it would be we support the efforts under the auspices of the UN. And I really like another great word he's got here, обозначившуюся динамику, emerging trends. That's really nice. I mean, I run into that word quite a bit, this обозначившуюся that I can't pronounce. What I tend to do is I'd say the trends taking shape. Is how I would probably do it. But that, you see, with the emerging, you can just do it straight away. You don't need to leave it till after the dynamica. That's a really good, quick way, effective way of dealing with that word. Towards finding a way out, or just for a развязка can be just a solution.
Russia, as a long-standing friend of Libya, has been helping with this.
That's good for давний друг, long-standing friend. So yeah, like he said, has been helping with this. You don't really need to say has helped and continues to help. I guess you could say you don't quite need to give it both the tenses as the Russians do. You could just say continues to help with this, because that by saying the continues, for example, that you are in so doing both reflecting they were doing it in the past and they still do it now.
Since the signing of the Skirat Agreement, we've been engaging in systematic work with the Libyan parties. We've been guided by the absolute need to preserve the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country.
Okay, so this was an important agreement, the Skirat Agreement. So the Skirat Agreement, what it says here on Wikipedia, the Government of National Accord is codified in the Libyan political agreement signed on the 17th September 2015 at a conference in Skirat, Morocco. The agreement was unanimously endorsed by the Security Council that has recognized the Government of National Accord is the sole legitimate government of Libya. So this agreement was very relevant at the time, back in 2017. Just to go on, the political agreement gives executive authority and a mandate approved by the UN-recognized Libyan Parliament, the legislative authority, the House of Representatives in Tobruk, the GNA. It also establishes the High Council of State, a consultative body independent of the GNA. So that High Council of State is still very much an institution now in Libya. So that political agreement expired in 2017. So it's been superseded a bit by more recent agreements, but you'll still hear references from time to time, I think, to that Skirat Agreement. It was quite important at the time. Couple of other small things. Don't get your systematic and systemic work mixed up. They are two separate concepts. So he says системную работу. So if you hear системную, you just say systemic. The work on the that refers to work on the system, as opposed to systematic, which means doing something in a systematic fashion. I like what he said, руководствуясь с императивом сохранения суверенитета. So yeah, руководствуясь, you want to say guided by, as he did, the imperative, or I think he said the vital need to maintain sovereignty. So he's added, as I say, the word need to give maybe just a bit more, just to enhance the clarity of meaning. You could probably say guided by the imperative to preserve the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. I think you can say either. So as I say, sometimes in English you do have to you do something, you need to add a word. Often in English, it's more a case of taking words away from the original. Here and there, though, there's you might want to add the occasional word to give something more clarity to an idea. So I think, as I say, in this case, I think you could do either.
We've been encouraging Libyans to overcome internal disputes and seek mutually acceptable solutions to all thorny issues, among other things. We've been highlighting the importance of nourishing constructive dialogue and ensuring its broad and representative nature.
Pobуждаем, I like for pobуждаем just saying we urge. It's quicker to say urge than encourage. Преодоление внутренних разногласий, so overcoming internal differences perhaps might be the more natural way of saying it in English. Spornych по всем спорным вопросам. That's a nice word, the solution that Sam's gone with thorny, all divisive issues, all contentious issues. Notice here, he actually pretty much puts a full stop in after вопросом and then sort of starts a new sentence, акцентируем важность развития. Again, just starting that, we highlight the importance of nourishing constructive dialogue. I mean, your standard solution for развитие is developing, obviously, and you'd be perfectly entitled to say that here. But it's nice to have something new. I like to foster dialogue, for example, is another one. To forge dialogue.
In this regard, a great deal remains to be done, as some political forces in Libya remain on the sidelines of the political process.
And again, that's nice for Abachina, on the sidelines of the political process, or on the margins.
That said, our fundamental position is that when it comes to shaping the fate of the country, that is something that should be reserved to Libyans.
So, Rishat Sudbu, shaping the fate of the country. If I was to nitpick here, I'd say, see, the fate always, to me, has a slightly negative connotation, and presumably we want to sort of be hyping things up a little, that things are going to be good for the Libyans. So you might want to say shaping the destiny has a slightly more positive ring to it. But again, either or.
Attempts to impose any blueprints on them are counterproductive in our view.
Now, here's a classic Russian expression that you can almost bet your bottom dollar that they're going to use it in a statement of this kind. Okay, попытки навязывать им готовые семьи. Or готовые, actually, usually they go with готовые рецепты. Now, when I was doing it myself, the expression that came to my mind first, and it's not usually this expression that comes to mind first, was cookie cutter. Okay, cookie cutter solutions. So usually I go with quick fixes. Attempts to, to impose quick fixes or identikit solutions. For some reason, when I was doing it, cookie cutter, okay, and it's fine. Sounds a bit American to me, but I always find it strange saying these sort of American expressions, but I think it works fine. So this what Sam says. I've not come across that one. Blueprints. I mean, that could work. It's not one I would perhaps go for, but I think it would be perfectly fine in the context. Would be counterproductive. Sometimes with counterproductive, if you find a long, it's quite a mouthful saying counterproductive. A quick word that means pretty much the same thing is futile. Futile, 2 syllables. Counterproductive, 5. Just as an alternative, right? Futile.
To reach lasting arrangements for the parameters of national reconciliation, significant efforts will need to be invested.
So he's turned для выхода into like an infinitive to reach sustainable arrangements. I think I nominalized it. So I mean, I dropped the dla and just went for so reaching sustainable arrangements. And by doing that, you see, then you with the patributs, then you can just go straight into requires, entails, isn't it? By the way, a synonym for requires or entails, involves, entails, right? Significant efforts. So there's different ways of approaching it. So as I say, Sam went with it to reach.
In this connection, what remains relevant are efforts of the international community to channel the political process in Libya.
I always find saying in this connection is a bit excessive, as in it's just a bit long, I find. I think here you could just say here, here. And then what is still relevant, остается актуальным. So yeah, here you've got to, when going into the English, to be able to follow a similar word order as in the Russian, you need to throw in that what. So what remains relevant, energetic, international support to the political process. Now, Sam actually says,
what remains relevant are efforts of the international community to channel the political process in Libya.
He actually paraphrases it slightly. I don't know if Nibienzi slightly changed slightly tweaked what he had to say. So he took it's interesting the choice of words сопровождение политический процесс. So he's gone with channeling the political process, which is nice actually. I think I would usually go, accompany is the word that tends to spring to mind first for сопровождение, supporting, harnessing the political process. But I like channel.
Doing so would help to ensure the stability at this transitional stage of the country's transformation.
Just note here how he's broken up that long sentence into two. So with the которое позволило бы, so he's just sort of gone full stop. Doing so would allow us to ensure stability. So again, that's a good tactic to adopt, when you've got longer sentences.
Such assistance should be concerted. There should be no unnecessary competition, which would only create further dividing lines.
Okay, he's gone with consolidированным. He's changed it to concerted, which I guess, okay. Consolidated would be fine, though, the cognate. Ненужная конкуренция, unnecessary competition. I think I said rivalry was the first word that sprang to my mind, but yeah, competition or rivalry. And dividing lines, that's an important concept that the Russians often talk about in politics, geopolitics. You want to avoid creating new dividing lines. I mean, again, in English, you've got new rifts, new fractures, which are a little bit quicker to say, but dividing lines is good.
This includes different forms of practical assistance given by foreign partners to Libya, including various training programs. The efforts of the UN will be fruitful only if we are playing by the same rules.
Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. He's said успешный только в том случае. He's gone with fruitful instead of what you might expect to be usually just successful, but fruitful's good. Now, the next bit is a real cracker. Wait and see.
We think the importance of proactive steps undertaken by international regional sponsors of the settlement process in Libya, including neighbouring countries.
Now, what you say is the masterpiece here. Well, I'm going to tell you what the masterpiece is. It's always a bit of a nuisance in Russian when a sentence starts считаем, and then you have an adjective. Now, it's okay when they say считаем что, that's easy, we believe that, blah, blah, blah. But it always can be a bit unsettling when the adjective immediately comes in like this, because if you said we believe, then you've got, okay, the важными, you've got to say something like we believe what's important are proactive steps, which sounds a bit clunky. I mean, it sounds okay if you haven't had time to think about it and you just end up, you got to get out of it somehow. You say, well, we believe what's important are proactive steps. When you're interpreting from Russian, you're going to use a lot of what's with these kinds of things. But I love what Sam has done here is he's turned the ważnymi into a noun. So he said, we note the importance of. Now, in that of, what makes this great is that of allows you to, for the next bit, it can accommodate either a noun, such as proactive steps, or it can, for example, it could accommodate a verb. We note the importance of providing logistical support. I don't know. We note the importance of helping Libya do this and that. When you've got that of, it gives you the option. You can either put a noun after it or a verb. So, and this is, look, you see, when I was preparing it, I don't know if you can see. Like I put these little smiley faces next to whatever it was, because I really liked that little technique, and I'm going to start adopting it. That when I hear the shitayim, I'm going to think, hang on, this may be just wait for no. We know the, for example, imagine if it was shitayim kontraproduktivnymi. So we note the counterproductivity, or we note the futility of doing something. Считаем полезным. We note the utility or the benefit of doing something. So you just tweak that adjective and you turn it into a noun. So I'm going to keep track of that little device in future texts, and I think it's going to work a treat. So yeah, you just say to yourself, we note and then turn the adjective into a noun and then add of, and then you can do whatever. Then you can go either way. You can go towards a verb, towards a noun. It's really nice, Sam. Very nice. And then, okay.
However, the main coordinating role should continue to be played by the UN. Our colleague, Mr. Skog, as the president of the UN Security Council 1970 Sanctions Committee concerning Libya, spoke about the activity of this subsidiary body over recent months.
Okay, so this committee, the 1970 Sanctions Committee. So these committees have chairs, okay, not presidents. It's a minor detail, okay. But that's the 1970 is the one on Libya. And it's a subsidiary body of the Security Council. That's an important expression to be comfortable with. The subsidiary body. Wspomagательный organ, not an auxiliary body. I think in my early days I was maybe saying auxiliary body, but that's a specific UN terminology, subsidiary body.
For our part, we note that the problem of the uncontrolled circulation of weapons in Libya remains critical, in particular in the absence of any unified army or other security structures.
Yeah, бесконтрольного хождения оружия. So he said the uncontrolled circulation of weapons, unrestricted, the unchecked. Any one of those are good. Хождение, I think the proliferation. They often talk about, in other contexts, the proliferation of weapons. I mean, so again, circulation's fine. Just giving a few alternatives. Often weapons, a good word to go with weapons is the proliferation of weapons. And again, this is all reference to the Gaddafi arsenals that went missing back in the early years of the conflict. I think for остается острый, he said critical, which is good. I think I said acute, which is very much a like-for-like rendering of острый. It's fine. I think maybe critical is a bit better.
This problem impacts upon the security within the country and in the Sahara-Saharan region. Thus, unstinting compliance with the arms embargo remains of the essence.
Okay, that's an important region just to know, the Sahara-Sahel region. It's like covers Central Africa, that sort of strip. In fact, I'll put a picture up just so that you can see what the Sahara-Sahel region actually refers to. Sahara means desert, obviously, in Arabic, and I think Sahel means the coast. Unstinting, neukosnительное соблюдение. Unstinting, unflinching, unswerving. Again, I got a few. Steadfast compliance with. So again, you got a lot of options there to keep turning around. And then he says it continues to be of the essence. That's a nice way of doing актуальной задачи. Or you could just say it continues to be a priority. I think there was one episode where I go and on a long rant going on about all these expressions in Russian, these different expressions that all basically boil down to one and the same thing, and being a priority is a top priority, you could say. So this is another example here.
As regards watering down the current regime, well, in the current circumstances, we think that conversation is premature.
So this is just an interesting little sentence from a geeky point of view, right? So in the Russian, it's very formal, very it's very much a prepared sentence. He's not speaking off the cuff here. This has been his writer, or he himself has prepared this speech. And in the Russian, the syntax is very much as you might find it in an essay or something. But the syntax is such that when you put it into the English, and if you want to follow it, if you want to follow the syntax in the Russian, the way you put it, the way it's expressed in English, sounds a lot more off the cuff. So notice the way. Okay, so he says «Опособление действующего режима в нынешних условиях вести разговор преждевременно». Very, as I say, formal. But in the English, when you put it like that, like Sam did, it kind of comes out a bit conversational in tone, a bit off the cuff. So he talks about watering down, in terms of watering down in the existing regime in the current conditions. Well, it's too early to talk about that. So that I find that, this is just a general comment, I find it a little bit disconcerting. When doing that in English, you're turning what's very formal Russian into a sort of almost conversational sentence in English, and you can't do anything about it. I'm not saying you can do anything about it. It's just that you can do it. Don't let it put you off. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, it doesn't matter. It's fine. It's a perfectly okay way of doing it. And this whole vesti, I think in these here you could just drop the vesti razgovor, perhaps. I think that might make your life slightly simpler. You could say watering down the existing regime under the current circumstances would be premature. In English we would say, okay, if you were to prepare this, if you had the text in advance and you were looking at it, you might say, any talk of watering down the existing regime under the current circumstances would be premature. We'd start any talk of, we'd put that right at the start of the sentence. Whereas putting in later sounds a bit odd. Yeah, again, it's fine doing it. I'm just saying that you could be forgiven here for just saying watering down the existing regime would be premature. I think you could also drop it as well. I think it'd be okay.
As to illicit exports of Libyan oil and oil products, this is a serious problem for the national economy.
Now, this is an issue, isn't it, that's brought up in that resolution, one of those resolutions that we looked at, specifically Resolution 2571. I think I even mentioned it, right? Expressing its concern that the illicit export of petroleum, including crude oil and refined petroleum products, продуктами ее переработки. So that's basically it, isn't it? Refined petroleum products. As a quick fix solution to save you having to say all that, maybe is just byproducts is a one word that I think sums up quite nicely. You could say with operations with Libyan oil and its byproducts. So that's, with any of these conflicts to do with oil, is there any conflict that's not to do with oil? Byproducts. Oil byproducts is maybe a handy word to have up your sleeve that you can use when they talk about products related to oil.
Nevertheless, measures taken through the Sanctions Committee should be applied strictly on the basis of real and verifiable data in accordance with the parameters set forth in UN Security Council resolutions.
This is an expression they use quite a bit in Russian when corroborating accusations or corroborating when justifying measures, the need for the data or the information that a decision is being made on to be credible, verifiable, substantiated is a good one, okay? So I think he's got on the basis of a real, verifiable data, maybe real, maybe genuine, authentic data, authentic information, genuine information, and then you've got, as I say, a few options here: verifiable, reliable. So yeah, have all these words going. Okay, so substantiated. These are all important words to have.
There should be no woolly interpretations here.
So I'm not quite certain what Sam meant to say in this last sentence. I don't know if he was meaning to say willy-nilly interpretations. Anyway, Volnik interpretatie. Again, this is a word, an expression that you really like to use a lot. I guess you could say willful. Was that what you were trying to say, Sam? Willful interpretations? I often say subjective interpretations, arbitrary interpretations. You take your pick, basically. Yeah, but again, it's one of those expressions that they use a lot, the Russian delegation, when talking about interpreting data or information, okay? So find an expression that you're comfortable with. Well, that brings us to the end then of that statement by Mr. Niebienzy. And so with that, we're going to move to, we haven't done this in a bit, Roland's magic moments. What are Roland's 3 magic moments for the day? Let's find out. So, what are Roland's magic moments for the day? You're probably saying, actually, first of all, oh look, he's wearing a different t-shirt. And he's not bouncing around like he was. Well, to be honest, I filmed Roland's magic moments 2 days ago, but then I can't find it. I lost it. I'm shit at computers, so I've lost it. So I'm having to do it again. Came back home from lunch. Was working this morning. Now I'm just come back at lunch. Film it again very quickly. Anyway, I've slightly tweaked the 3, 2, 1 that I had before just to make it more interesting. Magic moment number 3, Roland's magic moment number 3. I think this is an interesting new word. It's always good to have some new vocabulary. And I've decided to go with this word vraznoboy, okay, at cross purposes. If you remember, organy vlasti действуют vraznoboy, acting at cross purposes, in disarray. So that's a good new word to remember. I had originally, I'm gone with magic moment number 3 for обозначившуюся динамика, the emerging trend. But like I said, because I really like that emerging, what you did with that word, обозначившуюся. But anyway, I had a rethink. But remember both of them. Let's call it a tie for 3rd place. Magic moment number 2. Silver medal winner is... Oh, okay. This is my own invention here. Отрицательно сказывается. I really like what I came up with here for taking its toll on, just to say something a bit different to negatively impacting or affecting. Okay, so I think that's a nice new one to try, new expression to try. Which leaves us with magic moment number 1, and there's only really one contender for magic moment number 1, and it is, of course, Sam's version, what he did with that expression, считаем важными. We note the importance, okay? Turning that adjective into the noun and then ending with the of, leaving your options open to then move to either another noun or to a verb. I think it's outstanding. Okay, that's Roland's magic moment of the day, therefore, is that we note the importance for that. For that. Okay, there you have it. So, done that. If you've enjoyed the episode, you know what to do. Smash the thumbs up button. Please do subscribe if you're watching the episodes and you're getting benefit of them. It's always much appreciated. Follow me, of course, on the LinkedIn group page. There you can find my, not daily, I've got a bit lazy recently. It's more like every 2 days. Site translations that I do and other stuff. Little tidbits that I put up there just to keep the old vocab turning around the machine, to keep the machine oiled, if you like. So follow me there. Follow me here, subscribe, all that sort of thing. You'll find all the links that we mentioned in the episode down in the description box, obviously. And that's about that. All that remains then, I'm going to have my lunch now. Then I've got to go back to work. I'm working in a meeting on automated vehicles this afternoon. Automated vehicles. Fascinating stuff. Yes, so that means that episode 87 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.